it will make you a better photographer.
Yep.
All right.
And
Well, we've hit 10 a.m. For those of you who were logged on YouTube early, we we were having trouble last week with getting that up and streaming, and so this week we got it up a little bit prematurely, and in fear of having problems getting it started again, we just let people see the sausage get made backstage. So today I got Darren and Rick with me for the full hour. Woody might pop in and out a bit. He's got some other commitments this morning. And for those, if there's anyone who hasn't been to one of these before, we can't unmute everybody, unfortunately, because we have too many people. It would just turn into sort of chaos if everyone wanted to talk at once. But we're going to go through, talk about a bunch of stuff. We've got a chat window that everyone can type questions into, and we'll be watching that for live questions. We have a lot of questions that people submitted when they signed up for either YouTube or Zoom. And we'll be going through those. Darren's going to be watching our YouTube live stream. Darren's here in Portland as well. Rick is in LeGrand. And Rick and I are mainly just going to kind of talk about gear and a little bit about the state of the photo industry today, why we use the gear that we do, how we've kind of evolved what we use over the years and why, and also talk about the fact that neither one of us really thinks gear is the end all and be all or the most important thing, or really the thing that's going to take your photography to the next level in most cases. Would you agree with that, Rick?
I would. I think some people are like classic car collectors and want to have lots of gear, and that's fine. But, the camera is not going to make you a better photographer. The lens is not going to make you a better photographer. The lens is useful in certain situations where you might want to, become a macro photographer or for landscapes. But, it really is sort of practicing your craft that will make you a better photographer.
And I would just add that when it comes to gear and whether or not gear is going to improve your photography, it sort of depends on how well you know your equipment and whether you're pushing the boundaries of the equipment that you have.
Yes.
I think that it's far more important to own gear that you know and that you can work with in the dark, that you know where all the buttons are and you've used it long enough that well, I don't like to go over this amount of ISO, or if I'm gonna jack my ISO up to this rate, I want to make sure I don't underexpose, because trying to pull the shadows up is going to create posterization and severe noise. And I know that this lens, if I stop down past here, I start getting real softness from diffraction. But up at f16, it kind of comes back and I get a little bit sharper image. You need to work with your gear and kind of be analytical about what the results are that you're getting. And that's a lot easier to do in the digital age than it was for those of us who came up using film. I remember learning to be a film photographer. I had a little notebook with me and I would shoot 5 or 6 frames and then sit back with my Write in the Rain book and my pencil and take notes on what those exposures were. I had columns lined out in my Write in the Rain book, and I'd write a little note on why I did what I did and what the settings were and what the exposure and everything was. And then you get back the film from the lab and you gotta look at those slides through the loop and be looking back at your book at which number was what was working and what wasn't. Well, now you just push play on the back of the screen, look through your mirrorless viewfinder, zoom in and see what's working and what's not working. And you can get to the computer that night and blow things up, and it makes the learning curve so much faster. But I think that's what really makes you a better photographer, I think, is working with your gear, knowing it well, knowing its strengths, knowing its limitations. And then once you start kind of pushing up against those limitations for the type of work that you want to do, that's where you start thinking about what could do what could push my skills to a new level, because I'd have more capabilities with a different lens or with a different body. So, Rick, do you want to talk just a little bit about you have an interesting evolution. Rick and I come at this from 2 different places, which is kind of neat. Rick was a big time Canon photographer for years and years and years. And they got really excited early on in the mirrorless revolution when Sony came out with the A7. And you actually shot Nikon for a little while too.
Yeah.
When Nikon came out with the D800 and had the backlit sensor and the great high ISO performance combined with great high megapixel imagery,
Yeah,
and the
I
dynamic
was
range.
I was pretty I mean, I enjoyed Canon. I love the Canon glass, but I struggled with the camera bodies. Canon was first out of the chute, as far as I'm concerned, with the D30 back in 1999, 2000, and I was a Nikon film shooter up to that point, and I jumped whole hog on the Canon bandwagon, and I went all the way up to the 5D Mark IV, and I returned it because I just felt like I went going from the 5D Mark III to the 4, and I felt that there just wasn't enough new, there wasn't that much better noise wise. There weren't a lot of new features that really sort of made it feel like the camera I wanted. And I had a good friend Duncan Davidson, who was shooting Nikon, and I played around with his D800. And I was kind of at that point where I wanted to change. And so I moved over to the Nikon, just bought some lenses, bought a D800, and shot that for a while. And then Sony
Right about
came
the
out
time I
with
met you.
Yeah, right about yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
But I was only a Nikon shooter for probably 6-8 months, and it wasn't that I was dissatisfied with it. It was more that I was tired of carrying around such big gear. And yeah, and when Sony came out with the A7, well, actually before that, Sony came out with a tiny rangefinder camera with a fixed 35 millimeter f2 lens called the RX1. And I saw that camera and I was like, I gotta have it. This was one where it was just like, I love the size, I love the focal length. It has a beautiful Zeiss lens on it. And that was my first real experience with Sony. So I had the RX1, and the A7 came out. And I remember my friend Duncan was like, this looks like it might be something. And so we both bought an A7 and an A7R, and played around with them for a few months. And after that, my Nikon gear kind of went away. Of course, the myth of mirrorless is that somehow you're going to have lighter gear. And the reality is that once you start putting high quality glass on these things, your body's lighter, but the rest of your gear isn't. But yeah, so
yeah, you get the
so
big
and
lens.
and I'll be honest, my travels through Sony land have not been ideal, but I would also say that my travels through Canon land were not either.
Yeah.
I mean, I finally got, I was not happy with a couple of the Sony glass, but finally Sigma came out with an adapter that let me use my Canon 16-35 2.8L, which is like probably my favorite lens of all time, on my Sony. And once that came out, I mean, it's like things just kind of changed. If I were at that place today, I would probably go with the Z series, just because, having used yours, I like the feel of I mean, that was the thing I loved about Nikon. That short bit with Nikon was I felt they had the best user interface in that group of companies, So,
and I have I dabbled with a number of different film cameras. I worked with Mamiya medium format, Linhof large format, but I was always someone who wanted to move a little bit faster and be able to shift scenes quicker. And so I wound up shooting a lot with 35 millimeter Nikons through the years, doing film photography. And I had an F100 was the camera I was working with when I made the switch over to digital. It was a little later than Rick. I went with the Nikon D70 with 6 megapixel camera, and was just really enamored with the digital, the ability to not have to scan my slides to get them into Photoshop to work with them, because I was doing a lot of a lot of panoramas with medium format and 35 millimeter film where I'd scan them, put them in Photoshop, hand blend them because they didn't have automatic photo merger back in those days. And so the ability, even if you got 6 megapixels and you start doing panoramas, all of a sudden you can get high megapixel images from a digital sensor. And it was wonderful. And I loved it. And I've been a long time user of Nikon's ergonomics and menu system. And when mirrorless came along, I remember I was a big aficionado of the Luminous Landscape, Michael Reichman's website. And they got all excited about the Panasonic Lumix GH2. And I bought one of those, and I bought a stable of lenses for it. And I was just really disappointed both with the electronic viewfinder and the high ISO performance. If you got to 800 ISO, it certainly started to break down and just get really noisy. And to try to work in low light, the viewfinder looked to me like a low definition television I was looking at. I just couldn't see details in low light. And then, Nikon came out with the D800 and had that just incredible dynamic range. And let's face it, that's thanks to Sony's backlit sensor technology that they were licensing and still license for their top cameras. And it really broke a door open on, not needing to do as much exposure blending in HDR to get a natural looking shot with foreground and background without using, a straight line graduated filter to get a kind of an artificial line through your landscape. And it just kind of opened up some doorways, having that higher dynamic range. To me, that's what really was a revolution about the time that Sony started making the A7 series and Nikon's D800 came out, was that expansion of dynamic range. Much more important than megapixels was the ability to capture dark shadows and bright highlights. What Rick?
What's interesting is the dynamic range is one factor, but the other factor that has really changed the game in the last 2 years are the viewfinders.
Oh yeah, well that's where I'm headed.
You talk about those old EVFs, and they were just horrible. I mean, they were absolutely horrible. And
that, yeah.
I held off. So I was shooting with the A7R2 for years. The A7R3 came out and I was like, I don't see anything there that I really need. The A7R4 came out and you got the Z.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking through the Z viewfinder and was like, I was blown away at how crisp and clear it was.
Yeah.
And then that's where I was talking with our friend Matt Plaskowski about the A7R3 and the A7R4. And he's like, dude, you got to just upgrade just for the viewfinder alone.
Yeah.
And so before our Death Valley workshop that year, I bought the A7R3, and I actually have to say that outside of anything in the last 5 to 7 years, that viewfinder has changed my photography. It's changed the way that I'm able to work.
And that's where I'm sort of heading in my evolution here, because I dabbled. You actually for when my son was born, Rick gave me an old A7S that he was getting rid of, and he'd gotten the next Sony body, and I played around with that in that really nice 35-8 glass, and again, the viewfinder just seemed like a limitation to me. I got in low lit situations and I didn't feel like I could really see to compose in a way that I could looking through an optical viewfinder wide open with a good lens through a DSLR. And so I just kept using the Nikon predominantly. And then Nikon came out with the D800 and the D500. And I felt like finally we had like this just amazing 1-2 punch with an APS-C camera that was wonderful with long lenses for sports and action to get more reach on my full frame glass. And then the really high megapixel camera, full frame, to do wide angle landscapes. And I was just happy as a clam. And I remember I was on a workshop in Mount Rainier National Park, and Ron was on this one, actually staying with David Archer and I in a cabin right outside the park. And they announced that they were launching the Z6 and the Z7, and I ordered a Z6, and my statement at the time was, well, I'll get that, I'll review it, and I'll talk about why the D850 and the D500 are better. My thought was I'll buy this body and I'll review it, and I'll probably return it because of the viewfinder and because I just think DSLRs are better. I was a holdout. And when that camera came and I started to use it, I used it for a couple of weeks, and then I picked up the D850, and it felt so vastly inferior looking through the optical viewfinder. That was the thing. The viewfinders evolved, and I think that Nikon and Sony led the way with that. So, when you walk into your local Costco or your big box store and you see all the 4K TVs that are giant and it looks sharper than reality, more, when you see those views of a modern screen and what they're capable of, that's how it is looking through the viewfinders, especially in low lit situations. In the past, when you stop down with a DSLR, when you hit your depth of field preview and stop down to say f8 to see what your scene's actually going to look like for sharpness, it's super dim looking through that optical viewfinder. As the world gets darker, your view gets dimmer. It's harder to see whether your composition is lined up right or you've got your focus sharp. And all of a sudden with the mirrorless, the technology's gotten so good now that it amps up the ISO a little bit. You get a nice bright view through the viewfinder and you can see all that data. And I feel like the promise of mirrorless is finally here, along with the fact that the batteries last significantly longer than the earlier iterations. I think Sony has autofocus dialed in for mirrorless in a way that Nikon isn't quite there yet. Granted, it's Sony's, fourth round of cameras and Nikon's first, and Nikon has done an amazing job updating that autofocus over the last couple of years since the cameras launched via firmware. But, I still haven't gotten rid of my Nikon D500 back there with my 500 millimeter lens on it because I just have an easier time tracking fast moving erratic motion with their group area autofocus through their optical autofocusing. But I think that I know that the mirrorless on sensor focusing is going to eclipse optical focusing. Yeah, I think it already has in Sony's A9 series and maybe the A7R4. And I'm sure it will with Nikon very, very quickly because it can identify objects on the frame like a human eye or an animal eye, or you can tag a subject and it can track it across the sensor and the computer's tracking that subject. It's less of a rangefinder and a laser. The
last 24 months have been pretty crazy in terms of camera developments. It's like if you were looking, you've had your bodies for 5-6 years and you're looking at upgrading, it looks like this is a good time in pretty much for every company, maybe with the exception of Olympus at this point. Canon's new mirrorless look really good. The initial reports as a still shooter are quite good. A couple of the reports that I've seen out there from photographers using them is that they look like they're going to be at least up at the level that Sony and Nikon have been at in the last couple of years. There's still some wackiness with the 4K video recording and overheating and all that, but that's not something I would be doing anyway. So, Panasonic's doing some really cool stuff with their cameras, especially if you're interested in both stills and video.
Oh, their hybrid platform's amazing. The GH5 is an amazing camera for filmmakers. My friend Andy exclusively shoots with well, he doesn't exclusively shoot with those, but he shoots almost everything that he does as a professional filmmaker with those. They're just amazing.
Yeah. And Fuji, Fuji is kind of like the awkward stepsister, I think, in this whole group of camera companies. But Fuji makes fantastic bodies, really great lenses. I mean, I've still over here, the one film camera I still own and just bought a bunch of film for is my old 6x9 Fuji rangefinder with this just drop dead gorgeous 28 millimeter lens on it. Their X series, the X100 series, are really great sort of, walking around rangefinder cameras. So, I mean, everybody's doing good stuff these days. There were a couple of questions. that people had about Olympus, and it's hard to know at this point what's going to happen.
I think it's hard to buy a bad camera right now.
It is.
My one caveat with Olympus does some just incredible stuff with their high-end bodies. I can't remember what's the name of their top-end body.
OM1D.
Yeah, Mark
something.
II or whatever.
Yeah.
They have some really, really cool stuff where it'll kind of move the sensor around inside the body to create ultra high resolution images. And it does a lot of really crazy stuff. My one caveat with it is, you know, I had someone on the workshop that got dust on their sensor that we couldn't blow out. And, you know, I was talking about cleaning sensors and I said, well, wait a minute, we don't know about this one. It has a pretty fancy sensor carriage system. And when I looked into it, the word was that you have to send it into a Olympus registered technician to clean the sensor if you don't want to avoid the warranty because it's on this kind of sensitive carriage system. And so that worried me just slightly. That was the one caveat I'd have on Olympus. Awesome camera. If you're going to change lenses in dusty conditions a lot or dry conditions or, you know, snowy, cold conditions, I'd just be a little concerned. It's my one little caveat there. You know, and that's a thing to talk about with mirrorless versus DSLR and any kind of sensor that you're using. You know, in the old days of film, if dust got in the box, it moved along with that pane of film into the canister and the next one was clean. And today, if you're changing lenses in an interchangeable lens camera that's not completely sealed, you're going to get dust in there eventually. You're going to get, you know, a hair or something in there that's going to create little spots, particularly if you stop down, which we often do in the landscape. So you're going to notice it in those uniform scenes in the sky. Everybody's seen it. And I think just having a rocket blower brush and making that a daily part of your ritual, you know, you just pop that lens off, hold it upside down, blow your sensor out regularly. It's particularly important for mirrorless users because when you open that body up, the sensor is exposed to the air. And avoid opening it up with it tilted up where any dust falling through the air is going to fall on it. I like to hold it upside down when I'm changing lenses and things.
I think you should everyone should have, anyone with an interchangeable lens camera should have a set of sensor swabs, you know, and solution to, you know, I always have a set in my bag. I actually have a bunch because a lot of times when we go out to shoot on workshops, you know, people are like, I forgot to clean my sensor before we left. Yeah. So we have a little morning session doing that.
I think that a lot of people are afraid of cleaning their sensor, and it's really not a hard job at all. You know, once you've done it a few times, you'll just sort of shake your head that somebody might charge you $40 to do it because it's a few minute task. You know,
in the early days, people were. I mean, you know, we're still spending a lot of money on cameras, and the idea that I would stick something into the body and wipe it down was kind of scary. So sure. I think that it's also, that's another little thing about mirrorless is that you need to clean the sensor more often, but it's easier to do because it's closer to the surface and you're not reaching down through that mirror box, you know. I think that, you know, we've talked a lot about bodies and sort of the evolution of time over time to one camera system or another. And I think you've heard why both Rick and I are really preferring mirrorless. And it's really all about the viewfinder. You know, the other thing I would say about that viewfinder is it enables you in brightly lit, there's a couple of wonderful things. It enables you in brightly lit situations to review your images and zoom in to check focus, not trying to do it on a washed out screen in direct light. And if you're a person like me that, you know, to see anything, I have 20/10 vision at distance. I'm really blessed with my vision, but as I'm getting older, you know, to see my hand in front of my face, I need a couple of 2x readers. And so I was finding it really difficult to focus without having reading glasses all over my backpack and pocket with my DSLR. You know, I get in the live view and I really couldn't see what I was doing or read the top LCD. And with the mirrorless, all the menus, the controls, the settings, the checking focus, all that stuff can be done with your diopter adjusted for your vision perfectly through the viewfinder. So I don't really need to have my glasses at all. I just adjust the diopter for myself and everything's perfect through the viewfinder. There have been a couple of comments slash questions in the chat. I think especially if you're shooting with an older camera that has an electronic viewfinder, it's hard to convey how different this latest round of cameras is. I mean, it is literally better. I find looking at shots that I've taken through the electronic viewfinder better than the screen on the back of the camera.
Oh, by far.
I still use the screen on the back of the camera, especially in low light, because it's easier for me to look at. But these viewfinders are nothing short of amazing. I mean, they really are. You don't get the odd refresh rates that you used to get, and everything is really pretty crisp and clear.
Think about an old VHS tape on your new 4K TV versus a Blu-ray disc, or live streamed at 4K. It's that kind of a difference the last couple of years in viewfinders on the mirrorless cameras. It really is, and it's changed everything. I think I keep wanting to reiterate though what Rick and I say, that some of the greatest photographers of all time worked with Leica cameras that didn't have a light meter built in. So it really is about practice and honing your creative vision. And what we're talking about with gear is just tools that can increase your capacity to do the work that you love to do. I'm finding a revolution too in how sharp some of the new smaller lightweight lenses are, and the fact that I don't need to carry as big a ton of glass out with me. I'm particularly enamored with the lens that's on my Z6 that's filming this right now. I'm doing the ATEM Mini is bringing in my Z6 signal to my computer right now through my 24-70 f4, and just how sharp that lens is corner to corner at f4, and how small and light and well suited to the body. I think it's really neat that we're getting lenses that perform really, really well, that maybe don't have as wide a maximum aperture, but we're getting cameras that perform really, really well at higher ISO. So you got this wonderful blend, and that's where the promise of lighter weight really can come together. If you don't need that pro build 2.8 or 1.4 glass, they're making smaller optics that perform really well for these cameras with higher ISO capabilities, and you're able to work in lower lit situations at a narrower aperture and still get razor sharp images with a lighter weight setup that's cheaper. So there's a lot of fun stuff going on. I think for those of us who love to do landscape and longer exposures or astro work, or even portrait work where you're trying to put a model at ease, I think having a tripod that you can work with, that's easy to set up on, easy to just do micro adjustments as you're working, and rock solid and stable is also important. I think that, one of the things that I've noticed over time for myself and most of the photographers that I talk to is I think I probably spent $1,000 on tripods that I wound up selling for a penance or giving away because they really didn't work for me, en route to spending the money on a really good quality setup that works for me. And things that I don't want in a tripod, if I can avoid it, are a center column. If the tripod's height is dependent on a center column that raises up above where those three legs come together, you lose stability. Now you're up on a pole above that stable thing. I don't like heads where when I turn the lock, the camera moves another half an inch after I let go. I see a lot of that. A lot of lightweight travel tripods just aren't secure enough. When you put even a moderate weight, even a mirrorless camera on there with a reasonable lens, you tighten the head and then you'll see the scene drop when you take your hand off the camera. That's just a no way for me. I want a head that gets nice and tall, certainly to eye level. And I prefer a set of legs that are really, really tall. And it's not because I want to constantly work with a stepladder or with the camera up over my head. It's because I'm frequently on a hillside and I've got two legs set up relatively short to get to the set level that I want. And I need to throw that other leg way out and have it drop down the hill and still keep me at the level that I want. or there's a scene I want to photograph and there's a bunch of shrubs in the way and there's a little seawall and I can hop up on that seawall and put 2 legs on the seawall with me and throw one way down to the ground and still have it at eye level or a little below eye level. It's just more versatile. And so, you'll see videos of me on YouTube talking about these tall tripod legs. I get a lot of questions, and we've had questions submitted to this particular office hour about, well, if I've got a tall tripod, how do I see to level it when it's over my head? Well, and if you're going to work with it up over your head, it's nice to have a stepladder with you, or you find a rock to set up next to you somewhere. I mean, I don't tend to work with it very often up over my head. There's a couple of situations I can think of in memory. I was in Paris for Bastille Day, shooting fireworks over the Eiffel Tower in a huge crowd, and I set my tripod up really tall and tilted my screen down so that I could see it. And I used the camera's level to get level and compose and focus, and just fired with a remote trigger looking up at it. There are times, but most of the time.
I have a picture of you at Thor's Well with the tripod way over your head. So
one of the big reasons for that, I think, was because I knew I was likely to get inundated and I wanted to have the camera up a little higher.
And you were shooting down too.
I was shooting down. But I would have loved to have had a step ladder there. Although that would have even been more ridiculous.
Yes. Yes.
Thor's Well is a hazard zone. Let's just put it that way. There are several of you that I see the faces of in this room that have shot with me in hazard zones before. We're always careful, but it's a calculated risk. So, and I've come, I am not a particular fan of ball heads as a general purpose head for photography. No. I think they have their place. Now, when I'm using a star tracker, I like to have my star tracker on a pan and tilt head that I can make micro adjustments to get lined up on the North Star, left, right, up, down, just like I like to make micro adjustments that are level when I'm composing my scene. But then, I love this little Acratech GXP ultralight, really strong head to put the camera wherever I want off the star tracker. I think that's a great tool, or using it with a slider for time lapse or video. There are places where the ball head's really nice. There's times with macro where you just want to get a weird angle and the ball head lets you get right to it quick. But in general, I would much rather have a fluid head, or at least a pin and tilt head that stays level no matter what I do with the camera. And there's so often where you get into a composition and you look at it and you think, oh, it's almost perfect. I need to move just a little bit to the left. Well, I don't want to loosen the ball and have to move just a little bit to the left and then get back to the horizontal spot that I was and make sure that it's level again and then lock it. And every time I want to make a micro adjustment, I have to have all those thoughts. Well, am I still level? Did I move up and down? I just want to loosen the pan and just move a little bit to the left and stay level and lock it. I want to tilt up a little bit. Once you level that head from below, every movement you make, you stay level and you can precisely make little micro adjustments left, right, up, down, let alone for film. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, not to trash the ball head, but one of the problems I always had with the ball head was if you didn't have an L bracket on your body and you wanted a vertically oriented shot, you had to basically flop it to one side, which puts it off balance. I mean, you can have a rock bag and all that sort of stuff. It can be solid, but that was where the L bracket, even, as pricey as they were back in the day, was really the best thing I could do for a ball head, because then I was using the ball head to slightly adjust where I wanted to be in terms of composition, but I wasn't flopping it over. I've seen more than my share of tripods go over with a heavy camera flopped to the side to get that vertical shot. So
right. Well, and I think the great thing with the fluid head, particularly the fluid head that Rick and I know a number of you in this Zoom room are using as well, the 500 AH, is that you can use it with a long lens, very, very gimbal-like. It's not as quick and stable and fluid a motion as a gimbal, but you're also not carrying an extra, however many pounds a gimbal takes in your bag, say you're traveling or carrying it in a pack. It's kind of the one lens that does it all. If you like to do a little bit of video, you can do these beautiful smooth motions, left, right, tilts, and stay level throughout that work. That's why all cinematographers are using fluid heads out there.
So what about gimbals? I mean, are gimbals totally specialized equipment? Are they outdated now?
No.
So you use them for bird photography, right?
Bird photography, surf photography, anything where you're set up in a specific location. You don't need to be moving and resetting up frequently, and you're going to be using a really long lens. Now, I would argue that if you're using a really long lens, like a football photographer or a basketball photographer or someone running through the jungle looking for animals, I think a good quality monopod with just a tilt head is what you want to just get a little extra stability, but to be able to move quickly with it. But if you're going somewhere to photograph birds and you're setting up in a location, say a blind, or out on the edge of the water waiting for the action to play out in front of you in a refuge full of birds, the gimbal is wonderful because it remains perfectly fluidly balanced. I'm actually working with a gimbal right now. I'm not putting it out there yet, but I'm testing it. And when it just smoothly pans and tilts, sort of like you think about like a gun mount essentially. And when you let go of your lens, it just, to get it balanced, I mean, you can, whatever you do, it just drops right back. And it's just very easy to track motion and flow around.
But if you were
in, it'll stay level, just like a fluid head would. But it's not going
to
lock
it. Can you lock it if you're doing a landscape shot and you want to make sure your camera is absolutely locked?
And then I've got my collar loose right now to go vertical to horizontal. Right now, it's not going forward. It's twist. So this is vertical, and this is horizontal. They're great, but they only are going to attach to a long lens with a foot with a rail on it. You can't just set your body in there. It's only for long lens work. It's not going to work for anything but long lens work. Okay. So it winds up being an accessory that you carry around. And if somebody really wants one and they're a ball head or a fluid head user, one thing to look into, Wimberley makes a product that I've used in Africa before I had this that works quite well. It's called the Wimberley Sidekick, and it will convert. It just is an arm. You put your ball over to the side, mount set with the rail set up vertical, and it has an Arca Swiss thing that slots in. Or you put your fluid head tilted down to where the top of it is pointed vertically up and down, and clamp that in there. And then there's an arm that comes out with a gimbal clamp, and it works like a gimbal. It uses the pan of your normal head for the panning, and then it's got its own tilt axis, and it works quite well. It's not cheap. It's not super light. It's a couple pounds, but it's a cool accessory. I carried that in Africa along with my ball head back in the days before I used a fluid head, and it worked wonderful for wildlife shoots. It's all about what do you want to do? If you're someone who dabbles in birds and wildlife and you're not carrying around an 800 millimeter lens, well, I think that the fluid head that we talk about works just fine. It'll do everything that you want to do. You can get balanced on it so that the camera's not going to flop. If for some reason it does flop, the fluid holds it from not being so catastrophic. For anybody that watched my Approaching the Scene video this week about Arca Swiss clamps and QD connectors, I didn't get my 500 millimeter lens balanced on my Manfrotto camera. My camera just goes on the fluid and stops without flopping and crashing, because that fluid slows that down to where it's not a catastrophic failure. So that's my take on tripods and things. We had a lot of questions about this tripod versus that tripod, or what exactly are you recommending? Because there are a lot of videos that I have out there talking about camera support. And I actually want to share my screen just for a second to kind of take all those questions in one blow. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to point you to this web page on my site, hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. I know a lot of you use it. If you use these links, I do get affiliate money from B&H and from Amazon, and I have affiliate status with Acratech and Kirk too, just because I really love those companies and their products. But these are the things that I use and that I've come to over the years. I could link you to anything at B&H and Amazon. It's kind of a global affiliate link. I get a little percentage if you buy through my links. But if you go to Fluid Head and Tripods, I keep this updated. When I change my gear, I change these pages, and I've kind of got my ideal system set up here. It's that newer Leofoto tall, lightweight, cheaper set of legs with that amazing leveling adapter that lets you get right on the ground if you want, and the Kirk bridge for the 500 AH head. The whole thing's sort of laid out here under number one. Number two is a really lightweight, not super cheap, but a sub 4-pound eye level, no center column, beautiful pan tilt Acrotech setup. And then I've got a third section that's just for adapting your own set of legs to a fluid head or a pan and tilt head. And then finally, for those that are on more of a budget, I have a Benro system that's only $240 that is a relatively light fluid head system that gets to eye level with a short center column included. And there's also a little bit lighter carbon one that's another $100 that's linked in there. So if you wonder, what I'm advocating, they're all laid out here. If you have questions about them, email me. I'm easy to get to. But that's the gear I recommend. And if it changes, I will update it. Yeah. As new gear becomes available and I find things that I think work even better, I keep that page updated all the time.
And if I could just say, there's so many tripods, heads, accessories out there that are just, that could be your job, would be just evaluating what's out there. So
it's true.
It's hard to be a working photographer and evaluate everything that's out there. So
right. I feel really, really, really excited about finding this company. Leofoto has been around for a while, but they have really been up in their game this last year, producing a lot of new products, a lot of innovative products, and they're very responsive to customers and to people that use their gear like me. And actually that tall set of legs came about because I asked for it, and the US distributor hit up the people in China that make this stuff, and they're really excited about making ultra high quality products to get out on the market. And they put this set of legs together, and I'm just blown away by the CNC work at the top of it and the lightweight, stiff, beautifully machined, well thought out. There's things about it that are just better than any other tripod I've used, and I adore it, and I love how light and tall and slick it is, and I feel excited that I was part of the process of making it come to market here. So if you wonder why it's a little heavy on Leofoto lately, I'm just really enjoying their products. I think they're making great stuff. So should we move on to some questions? We're starting to get tight on time, and
I was gonna say we got about 15 minutes left, and I've got a bunch of questions here.
Yeah, let's talk questions.
All right. Tom asks about the optimal place for rock bag, and rock bag is one of those things that you and I don't think we go out without one.
No.
I actually sometimes go out with a rock because I don't want to even have to dig something up. But it should go fairly high up on the tripod.
Yeah. If you guys can see these, I'm actually going to pull my little ultra lightweight system up here. I'm a huge advocate of wrapping your legs with this cork bicycle tape that road bikers use to wrap their handlebars with for a nice grip. And it protects the carbon. It makes it nicer to hold on to, particularly in cold conditions. And I wrap a little bit of gaff tape around the top and the bottom of it. And then when I put my rock bag on, I just leave a little gap below where the top plate of the tripod meets the carbon leg. And that's where I attach my stone bag. It keeps it from sliding down the carbon that way. And the nice thing about having it attached there is you can still get a rock or whatever in it, and yet you can still go out vertical, with your legs, or, go flat with your tripod, and it doesn't impede the ability to do that. It doesn't really change the way your tripod behaves at all. And I actually had someone tell me that if they loosened the straps on the stone bag, a lot of times when they're out backpacking, they loosen it and put the stone bag over the head on the outside of their pack just to protect it from brush, and then tighten these tensioners back down to just use it as a little protective sack over the top of the tripod out in the brush. So that's kind of a neat thing. I saw somebody asking about having a hard time tightening their legs. Yeah, well, okay. Someone said that they had a problem with the 500 AH not tightening down to stop from panning. And I think, unfortunately, people damage them putting them on the top of a tripod that doesn't have set screws that drive into the base of the head. I really think any
Yes.
of your leveling systems or tripods with a built-in leveler, if they don't have a set screw driving up into the base of your head, it's a really good way to damage the mechanism in whatever tripod head you're using, whether it's a ball head or a fluid head, because you have to torque that panning knob and then thread it on tightly enough that when you pan, it doesn't loosen off the top of the head. I prefer just threading it on just barely snug and then driving set screws up into the base. All these Leofoto solutions I have that. My Kirk head locks down tight from panning, but I think it can get damaged if you over torque the panning knob. I think over tensioning knobs is a real a lot of people just tend to over torque knobs, and I think that you can easily damage a head that way.
Let's see here. A question about rock claws from John. He said he shoots a lot in the desert with soft sandstone. He said, would it be best to use a standard rubber tripod feet in that type of location? He doesn't want to destroy something that took nature millions of years to create.
You know, it's certainly easy to carry a set of rubber feet along with you, and rubber sticks nicely to sandstone. I think that's a great conservation-minded consideration. And I haven't noticed, I mean, I've shot a lot in Moab and in sort of slick rock and sandstone. I haven't noticed any marring from my rock claws, but if I did, I would switch out to rubber feet. And I don't see how rubber feet aren't going to hurt you in that type of surface.
Yeah.
They're so great in granite and in mountain streams, particularly slick, wet stones and mountain streams and along rivers. There's just they're fantastic in a whole bunch of situations. But yeah, if you feel they're damaging the surface, absolutely bring a pair of rubber feet along with you.
We've got a bunch of questions about filters. I'll try and sort of throw them together. Charlie's been looking at some high-end graduated filters from Wine Country. I know we've talked about graduated filters in the field recently, but still be good to do that. We had a question from Bill about light pollution filters for night sky photography and whether you've used any of those. And then there's a sort of a straight, Lee filter versus Hoya. And I can actually talk to that, but I start with the graduated filters.
Graduated filters to me, sure, there's an occasion now and again where I get out in the field and there's a perfectly straight exposure line that runs the entire image. I'm thinking of maybe looking out to open sea with a sunset sky and a shaded foreground. That it could be nice. But in most cases, there's a tree that crosses that boundary, or there's a mountain that sticks up into the sky, or there's something that you're going to be artificially darkening that shouldn't be darkened, or you're going to leave something out that you'd like to be darkened. You have this line that you're throwing across the landscape. So to me, I would much rather deal with that kind of exposure differential by bracketing and then either hand blending in layers in Photoshop or on one, or doing automated HDR in a natural way that doesn't, to me, look, that sort of cartoonish HDR that people were into. You can get a nice natural look that gets all of that data combined in one linear file.
It's hard to beat RAW. I mean, in the days where you were mostly shooting JPEG, I could see a use for it, but
in the days of film, Galen
and
Rowell,
in the days of film, yes, but
in the days of film, I shot with a graduated filter so much. I remember Galen Rowell put out those Stingray graduated filters, and I used the heck out of them. I still have them in a box in the basement somewhere, but I don't carry those anymore for digital still photography. I just don't use graduated filters. I would much rather bracket and get that exposure data and be able to do it in a localized way where I can not affect the tree that's going up into the sky. Now, when it comes to time lapse or video shooting, I think the graduated filter can be handy. You have to make compromises. You can't go in and do that kind of post-production level work when you're firing 24 frames a second and blending it to video and compressing it to a level that it's not very editable in post. So, I still use some graduated filters in time lapse and video. And the ones that I do are these really high-end Koken filters, believe it or not. It's a lot like Lee's system. And there are a number of companies putting out really, really high quality glass. I think surprisingly, you'd be surprised Koken Nuances, go look at them. They're like $350 a filter. And Lee is making really good filters. There's a lot of companies making great glass. I can't test them all. But for still photography, I'd a lot rather deal with the simplicity of solid neutral density and a really high quality polarizer. And I do use light pollution filters. I use the color enhancing filter. And Hoya has been a brand that's worked with me and sponsored me. And I don't really test their lower end filters, but their high end filters, their HD3 polarizer, HD3 UV protective filters, and their Solus infrared neutral density filters, and their color enhancing filter. I've tested all those extensively and I stand by them. I love them. I think they're really, really high end, good quality glass and good people to work with. So I do work with Hoya, and I haven't really worked with Lee that much. Rick, you want to talk to the Lee versus
I used
Hoya?
Lee. I used Lee filters for years. And they're the big sheet of glass that goes on an adapter that you get, one for each lens, and they were great. They're fragile. They take up more room, and if you're a more thoughtful shooter, in the sense that you like the art of setting up and getting that right place and getting everything right. They're not bad. They're really high quality glass, but I haven't shot with them in 4 years just because I've kind of between Hoya and B&W, I've got the filter sets that work for me for my different lens setups, and a set of step down rings. I buy 82 millimeter filters and I just use step down rings to get them down to my 77, my 72, that sort of thing. And those are really cheap. I mean, I think I bought a set on Amazon earlier this year for like $27. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the Lee Koken style filters. It's just a different type of shooting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So surprise, there's a bunch of Z questions. And I think there's two kind of things. One is, Nikon's announced the Z5. I don't know. It's not available yet, right? It's still.
I think you can. I don't know whether you can pre-order. You can pre-order it for sure. I'm not sure how quickly it's going to get to you. I've been getting a lot of questions about reviewing it, and I'm actually going to address that in the ATS this week.
Okay.
I can give you a little preview in that I'm not going to review it because I think that for most of the people that are in my audience, I think you're far better off spending the saving a little bit extra and buying the Z6 for its backlit sensor and its better high ISO performance and a little bit more robust build. It's just got a better sensor and a faster frame rate. There's a number of things. The screen is nicer. There's just a lot that I think is functionally better with the Z6. I think it's a more of to lure entry level customers in. And I sort of think if you're really looking for a budget mirrorless option, the Z50 is a fun little camera. So I don't see myself. Yeah, I don't really review and push stuff I wouldn't use. So I would definitely advocate the Z6 over it.
So a couple of similar questions about lenses. People would like a good quality zoom lens for their Z systems.
Good quality zoom lenses for the Z system. I love the 24-70 f4. Everybody keeps asking me, well, are you going to get the 24-70 2.8? And the funny thing is that in the days of film and in the days of DSLRs, I did not carry the 24-70 2.8. I preferred having the ultra wide, the 14-24, which I have on my D850 right here, this giant beast of heavy glass, which I'm finally, after years and years and years of this being my favorite lens, the one lens I couldn't live without, I'm going to be selling these two beasts here. I keep threatening it, but I just need to get a little extra time and take some photos because they're going away, particularly
Is
with
there
the
a,
Advent, the star tracker
so
that I'm using. So I'm
is
using
there
the
a
30, which is
which
smaller and
one?
lighter. The 14 to 30, which is smaller and lighter for the Z camera. The little f4, it's smaller, it's lighter, it takes filters. I will test the 14 to 24 2.8 when it comes out just to see how good it is and probably fall in love with it. But the reason I don't carry the 24 to 70 2.8 is it's huge, it's expensive, and the 24 to 70 f4 is so good. It's light, it's sharp edge to edge. I don't frequently need that extra light gathering ability with the quality of the high ISO images that I get out of these cameras. And I can easily carry this little 50 1.8, and you can buy the 24 to 70 with the camera body and this little 51.8 and have a whole bunch of money left over. And this is such a wonderful, wonderful lens. And I feel it's not that hard to move my feet to get sort of a different composition between the 30 millimeters in the 14 to 30 and the 70 millimeters in my 70 to 200 that I like to have with me. That, having this lens as a low light, wide aperture, blurb background little weapon in my kit, and the 24 to 70 f4 is a
That,
knock around, lightweight, fits the camera well, sharp edge to edge at f4. I mean, the 24 to 70 f4 is just a wonderful lens.
so I'll for those people who are bored to tears of the Z stuff, I'll say that the Zeiss 55-1.8 is just like that 50-1.8. I mean, it's the lens that is almost always on my Sony when I pack it up.
They both get really
Yeah.
similar marks from DxO Mark too. Yeah, they're both wonderful lenses.
So have you played with any of the Z 70 to 200s, or are they?
I have a Z70 to 200 landing on Thursday after ordering it, one of the first MPS orders back last winter. I think that COVID hit their manufacturing so hard. I mean, everyone has been waiting for that lens. I think they released a few test examples, probably early models to some Nikon ambassadors and people way back when they first announced it, and then no one's heard anything of it since. And so I'm very excited to test that on Thursday. I am a huge advocate and lover of the last F mount 70 to 200, the FLED. It solved the problems that I had with the earlier 70 to 200 2.8 lenses that Nikon made, where they did a lot of focus breathing. Focus breathing being that it actually changes focal length as you focus closer and out to infinity. It actually, the VR2 version of this lens changed from a 200 millimeter to 120 millimeter as you focused in as close as you could. So for portrait photographers blurring out a background, they had to be closer to their model because they were really shooting at 120 millimeters. This one doesn't really do any focus breathing. It stays at 200. It focuses closer. It's razor sharp. It doesn't have the vignetting problems. It's a great lens. Focuses fast. Works great through the FTZ adapter. I don't know that I'm gonna switch over full time to that new S class, but it is supposed to be even better. I'm excited to test it on Thursday. Look for results of that really soon.
Okay. All right. Well, we're running out of time. I've got one last question that's kind of a more philosophical one from Chris. And he said, what's your best advice for amateur photographers to afford new gear? Buy, trade out when the new camera body's available, wait for a year and hope the price drops. Not all of us have unlimited bank accounts where we can just kind of, go out and buy the latest and greatest. I tend to throw things up on eBay when I'm looking for a new lens or a new camera body. I've kind of run out of most of my core great lenses from the old days. But any thoughts on that?
I think that being a careful eBay trader is a great thing. You do wind up paying seller's fees, and you need to develop a good reputation where people can trust you. And you need to look carefully at the people that you're buying from, look through their feedback, make sure they have a good reputation, make sure that the photos are really accurate. read people's comments about things they've sold before. I have a little, there's a concern, there's a red flag that goes up in my head with buying used bodies on eBay. I have not done that just because you're buying a computer, and it's difficult to know what's happened to that. It's like, who knows how that's been handled and treated. It just is you may get a great deal, but I'd rather buy a used body from someone like B&H if you go to their used department, just because they will take it back if there's a problem. You buy it and you test the heck out of it in the first week that you have it, and make sure there's nothing wrong with it. Lenses, I have a little easier time with, just because usually you can tell from photos whether a lens has been babied. I'm usually looking to buy a used lens on eBay that has been babied, and I got this 70-200 f/LED off of eBay for about a third off of what it would be retail brand new. I bought a lot of lenses that way and had great luck. I've only had a couple bad experiences, and usually if they were misdescribed, eBay and PayPal will take care of you. The buyer is usually supreme in eBay situations.
Yes.
So I would not hesitate to buy good quality optics used that way. I think that when Rick and I started this whole discussion out, we talked about the fact that new gear is not the end all and be all. And I think it's fine to wait a little while before adopting the latest and greatest camera technology to see what everyone thinks about it, to let the value drop a little bit. Because just like when a new car hits the market, if you order that first one, often, it doesn't have all the kinks worked out. Just like software these days, these are computers that come out with software. It's maybe not completely cooked. It's going to take a couple of firmwares for them to get up to running optimally. You're going to read a lot of reviews, and then the prices are going to come down as people start anticipating the next one. And there's nothing wrong with waiting around a little bit for the prices to come down. I think about my Mac software. I never update my operating system on my Mac until they're announcing the next one, because I know that if I'm the first person to download and install all kinds of software that I have that I use all the time, I'm going to run into compatibility issues and problems and headaches that will get ironed out in the next 6 months. So, again, it isn't going to suddenly make you a better photographer buying the brand new camera body. I mean, maybe you can take pictures in lower lit situations and not have to do as much noise reduction work. Yeah, that's true. Maybe
that's a good reason. That's a good reason to be thinking about things, is what do you need that new camera body for? What is it going to do in terms of helping you get better?
What's better about it? And I think for those of you sitting on, a Nikon D810 or a, D7000 or a Canon 70D or something like, you don't necessarily need to buy the mirrorless camera that's going to launch at the end of this year. You could buy the one that launched 2 years ago as they launch the next one and be as pleased as could be and save quite a bit of money. Buying what's left over in stock as the new model comes out, it's not going to be that much better. And it's going to be significantly better than the camera you've been shooting for the last 5 years. The progress in the last couple of years has just been incredible. It's the same thing with cell phones. I skip every generation of phone now. I used to be excited about every year. Now there's so much money and they aren't that much better than the last phone. I mean, what's it going to do that my phone doesn't do right now? I don't need to get a new phone every year. I think those, it's hold on. But buying used, be a little cautious with the body.
I have to say, having shared a studio with Hudson for a few years, that I keep telling him he needs to do a course on buying on eBay, because the stuff that would show up in the studio that he bought on eBay, be like, look at this, man, I got this for third off. I mean, his kids had all sorts of Patagonia gear, when they were little. And I'm like, what? And it's like, oh, I got this off of eBay. It was unbelievable. So,
well, yeah,
anyway,
I got them like $200 down puffy suits that look like Everest expedition wear for, it would be like $300 in the store. And I got it for, $50 on eBay because the kids outgrew it and they wanted to sell it somewhere.
All right. So
yeah.
I think,
do you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in a couple of weeks?
Yeah. So there'll be no office hours next week. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have a special guest, our good friend, photographer, lynda.com, and author Ben Long is going to be with us. And if you've been on the office hours for a while, you've been on workshops with us, if you've talked with us about photography, you know that we're advocates of practice, practice, practice. And I'm actually working with Ben on his next book, which is actually not a photography book in the sense of it's got full of photographs. It's actually essays on how to build a practice in your photography. And so Ben's going to come and talk to us about practice, because practice isn't just going out and shooting. That's part of it. But, practice is on the computer, practice is thinking about photography, practice is looking at photography. And so we just figured we'd have a nice little chat with Ben. If you've got any questions for Ben, many of you know him. Many of you've either gotten his books or seen his videos.
Ben's fun.
He's a lot of fun. So we'll be doing that 2 weeks from today. I think that's the 15th of September. I can't believe it's September already. So everybody have a great Labor Day weekend. Shoot, shoot, shoot. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Hey, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks to Darren and Rick. And I know Woody's hanging out there somewhere. I don't know if he's listening or not. He's got other things going on. But thanks to everybody for showing up. And if you were on YouTube watching the whole backstage thing in the beginning, we'll try to iron that out where we know what we're doing and start it up at the right time next time. So
or we'll
thanks,
tell
everybody.
Stories or something.
We'll see you all in a couple weeks with Ben. It's going to be a blast. And everybody stay safe. And we'll see you next time.
And keep printing, Ron.